Chapter 3 The Thief. There is much that I could say about the happy and tender incidents in my childhood days. The sense of security which I enjoyed with my parents, my childish affection and carefree, irresponsible existence in gentle and affectionate ambience. But my interest is reserved for the steps that I took in my life towards self-realization. All the pleasant points of repose, islands of happiness, paradise whose magic was not unknown to me can remain, as far as I am concerned, in the enchanted distance, for it is not a world that I have any particular desire to re-enter. While I linger here in my boyhood days, I am speaking of things that were new experiences and carried me forward with them. These impulses came without exception from the other world, were always attended by fear, constraint, and bad conscience. They were always revolutionary and constituted a threat to the peace of mind in which I would gladly have continued to live. Then came years when once again I could no longer hide from myself the existence of the old urge driving me back into the world of light to hide there. My gradual awareness of sex loomed up before me, as it does before everyone, as an enemy and destroyer, as something forbidden, corrupt, and sinful. What my curiosity had hoped for, what my dreams, desire, and fear aroused in me, the great secret of puberty, did not fit into the circumscribed happiness of my childhood's joy. I behaved like everybody else. I led the double life of the child who is no longer a child. My conscious self lived in the homely and sanctioned. My conscious self denied the new world that was darkling round me. Side by side with this, however, I lived in dreams, actions, desires of a subterranean kind over which my conscious life nervously constructed a series of bridges, for my childhood's world was falling apart. Like almost all parents, mine made no attempt to foster the stirring roots of life. No reference was made to them. All they did was to go to endless trouble to bolster my hopeless attempts to deny reality and continue to dwell in a child's world which was becoming more and more unreal and false. It may be that parents cannot do much about it, and I am not trying to reproach mine. It was my own affair to see myself through and find my own way, and like most well-brought-up children, I managed it badly. Every man goes through this period of crisis. For the average man, it is the point in his life when the demands of his own fate are most at odds with his environment, when the way ahead is most hardly won. For many, it is the only time in their lives when they experience the dying and resurrection which is our lot during the decay and slow collapse of childhood, when we are abandoned by everything we love and suddenly feel the loneliness and deathly cold of the world around us. And a great many people stay forever hanging on to this cliff and cling desperately their whole life to the irrevocable past, the dream of the lost paradise, which is the worst and most ruthless of all dreams. If I turn back the pages of my story, the sensations which announced the end of my childhood are too insignificant to be mentioned. The important thing was that the dark world, the other world, was there again. What had once been Franz Cromer was now embedded in me, and in this way, the other world was gaining power over me from outside. Several years had gone by since the Cromer affair. At that time, the dramatic and guilty period of my life lay far behind me and seemed to have melted away like a brief nightmare. Franz Cromer had long vanished out of my life. I hardly gave him a thought even when I met him. However, the other important figure in my tragic story, Max Demian, was no longer absent from my circle. Although for a long time he stood at the perimeter, visible but out of effective range. Only gradually did he come closer and radiate his strength and influence. I'm trying to think what I remember of Demian at that time. It may be that for a year or more I did not once speak to him. I avoided him, and on the few occasions when we did meet, he merely nodded to me. Sometimes I got the impression that there was a faint ring of derision and ironical reproach in this friendliness, but it may have been my fancy. The experience I had shared with him and the strange influence which he had exerted on me were as though forgotten by both of us. I'm trying to conjure up his figure, and now when I think of him, I see that he was indeed present in my life. I can see him on his way to school, alone or among others of the senior boys, and I can see him strange, lonely, and quiet, wandering aloof in their midst, surrounded by his own aura, a law unto himself. Nobody liked him. No one was on intimate terms with him except his mother, and even with her, his relations seemed to be those of an adult rather than a child. The teachers mostly left him to himself. He was a bright pupil, but he made no attempt to please anybody, and now and again we heard of sayings, comments, or retorts which he was rumored to have made to one or other of the teachers, which, as examples of forthrightness and irony, left little to be desired. As I close my eyes and reflect, I see his image rise up before me. Where was it? Oh yes, I have it now. He was in the narrow lane in front of our house. One day I saw him standing there, notebook in hand, sketching. He was drawing the old coat of arms with a bird above our front entrance. As I stood concealed behind the curtain, watching him, I felt a deep admiration for that keen, cool, bright face turned towards the coat of arms. It was the face of a full-grown man, a scholar or artist, deliberate and purposeful, strangely clear and self-possessed, and with a discriminating eye. I saw him on another occasion a little later on in the street when we were on our way home from school, and I stopped to look at a fallen horse. It lay still, harnessed to the shaft in front of a peasant cart, snorting plaintively in the air with dilated nostrils bleeding from a hidden wound, so that the white street dust at his side was being slowly stained dark red. As I turned away with a feeling of nausea, I noticed Damian's expression. He had not thrust himself to the front, but stood right at the back, looking elegant and at ease as usual. His glance seemed directed at the horse's head, and again it showed that deep, quiet, almost fanatical yet passionate absorption. I could not help staring at him for some moments, and it was then that I felt aware of a very uncanny sensation in my remote consciousness. I saw Damian's face and remarked that it was not a boy's face but a man's, and then I saw, or rather became aware, that it was not really the face of man either. It had something different about it, almost a feminine element. And for the time being, his face seemed neither masculine nor childish, neither old nor young, but 100 years old, almost timeless and bearing the mark of other periods of history than our own. Animals might look thus, trees or stars. I did not know then, of course, I did not feel exactly what I am writing about it now as an adult, but it was something of a kind. Perhaps he was handsome, perhaps I found him attractive, perhaps he repelled me too. I could not even be sure of that. All I saw was that he was different from the rest of us, that he was like an animal, a spirit, or an image. I cannot describe him except to say that he was different, unimaginably different from the rest of us. My memory is a blank without everything else, and perhaps even what I have described is to some extent gleaned from later impressions. Only when I was several years older did I come into close touch with him. Contrary to the usual custom, Demian had not been confirmed with the other boys of his year, and once again rumors had been rife. It was said that he was a Jew or heathen, more likely, and some boys were convinced that he and his mother had either no religion or belonged to a fanatic and disreputable sect. In this connection, I remember having heard that he was suspected of being his mother's lover. Probably the fact of the matter was that he had been brought up without any particular religion, and this caused everybody to forecast an unsavory future for him. At all events, his mother decided not to allow him to be confirmed until 2 years after the boys in his class. So it came about that for months he attended the same confirmation classes as I did. For a time I completely avoided him. I did not want to have anything to do with him. Too many rumors and secrets hung about him, and I was particularly disturbed by my feeling and of indebtedness towards him ever since the Cromer affair. I had enough to do with my own secret. The confirmation classes coincided with this critical period of my initiation into sex, and against my best intentions, my interest in matters of piety was thereby considerably prejudiced. The things the pastor spoke about lay remote in a quiet, holy reality of their own. All very fine and precious, doubtless, but to me they lacked the reality and excitement that the other world possessed in the highest degree. The more indifferent this attitude made me towards religious instruction, the more interested I became in Demian. A bond seemed to exist between us, and I must choose this moment to follow up that thread in my life as accurately as I can. As far as I remember, it all began one day in the early morning class when the light was still burning in the schoolroom. Our scriptures teacher, a pastor, had embarked on the story of Cain and Abel. I was still sleepy and only listening with half an ear. All at once the pastor began to hold forth about the mark of Cain in loud and excited tones. At that moment I became aware of a stirring up inside me, a kind of challenge, and looking up, I saw Demian's face turning round towards me from the front desk with that clear, eloquent glance of his which might be expressing scorn or gravity. You could not be sure which. He merely looked at me for a moment, and suddenly I gave the pastor's words my fullest attention, listened to him speaking of Cain and his mark, and felt deep within me the knowledge that the thing was not as he was teaching it, but that there was an alternative interpretation, and that criticism of his view was justifiable. A fresh bond was forged between Demian and myself in that moment, and strangely enough, hardly was I aware of the spiritual closeness between us when I saw it translated as if by magic into physical closeness. I had no idea whether he had managed to arrange it in that way or whether it was fate. I firmly believed in strokes of fate at the time, but a few days later Demian had suddenly changed his place in a scripture class and sat directly in front of me. I cannot recall how I enjoyed smelling the fresh, delicate perfume of soap from his neck in the midst of the miserable workhouse atmosphere of the overcrowded schoolroom. And again, some days later, he had changed places again and was sitting next to me where he stayed all through winter and spring. The morning lessons now were utterly transformed. They no longer made me sleepy and bored. I looked forward to them. We would often listen to the pastor with the greatest concentration, and a glance from my neighbors sufficed to draw my attention to any remarkable story or strange saying. Another kind of glance, a very meaning one, sufficed to awaken a critical doubt inside me. All too often, however, we were inattentive pupils and paying little heed to the lesson. Demian was always a model of good behavior in his relations both to masters and fellow pupils. I never caught him indulging in the usual schoolboy pranks, never heard him guffaw or chatter or incur the teacher's displeasure. But quietly and more by means of signs and glances than whisperings he contrived to make me share in his preoccupations. Some of these were most odd. He told me, for example, which of the other boys interested him and how he made them the object of his study. He knew a number of them very well. Sometimes he would say to me before the lesson, "If I give you a signal with my thumb, so and so will turn round and look at us or scratch his neck," and similar things. During the lesson, often when I had forgotten all about it, Max would suddenly jerk his thumb in an odd way for my benefit, and I would steal a rapid glance at the boy he was indicating, and on each occasion the boy would make the gesture rolled upon him as if he were a puppet on strings. I plagued Max to try this trick on a master, but he refused. Once, however, when I came into the lesson and told him I had not learned my prep and desperately hoped that the pastor would not ask me any question, he came to my rescue. The pastor was looking for a pupil to recite a passage of the catechism, and his roving eye alighted on my guilty face. He slowly strode up to me, pointed his finger in my direction, and already had my name on his lips, when all at once he became distracted, looked uncomfortable, and figured his collar, walked up to Demian, who resolutely met his glance, and seemed to want to ask him something. But he quietly turned away again, cleared his throat a few times, and chose another pupil. Only gradually did I become aware that at the same time as I was finding amusement in those jokes, I was myself a frequent victim of a similar trick. I would have the feeling on my way to school that Demian was walking a short distance behind me. When I turned round, I discovered he was there in reality. "Can you really make another person think what you want?" I asked him. He answered quite readily in his quiet, factual, grown-up way. "No," he said. "We haven't free will, whatever the pastor makes out. The other person can think what he will any more than I can make him think what I will. It is possible, however, to think hard about someone and frequently guess what he is thinking and feeling, and then, more often than not, no one can anticipate his next move. It is simple enough, only people don't know it. Naturally, you need practice. There is, for example, a species of moth in which the females are much less common than the males. Moths breed like all animals. The male fertilizes the female who lays the eggs. If you get hold of a female of this particular species of moth, the experiment has often been tried by naturalists. The males come flying to this female in the night for hours on end. Just think, for several miles around these males smell the only female in the district. We try to find an explanation, but it is difficult. They must have a sense of smell or something. It is like the way good gun dogs can pick up and follow what would appear to be an imperceptible scent. Do you get the idea? It's the kind of an inexplicable thing that nature bounds in. This, however, I can say, if the females were as common as the males among these moths, the latter would not have such a fine nose. They've acquired that merely because they've trained themselves to it. If an animal or man bends his whole will to certain end, he achieves it. It's as simple as that. And that is how it is in the present case. Examine a man closely enough and you'll soon know more about him than he does himself. It was on the tip of my tongue to mention the word thought reading and remind him of the scene with Cromer, which was now so remote. But the subject had become taboo between us, and neither he nor I ever made the vaguest allusion to the fact that several years ago he had seriously concerned himself with my life. It was as if no previous relationship had ever existed between us, as if each of us presumed the other had forgotten about it. Indeed, it happened on one or two occasions that As we were walking along the street, we encountered Franz Cromer, yet we neither of us exchanged a glance nor mentioned a word about him. But what is this will business? I asked him. You say that we don't possess his free will, but then again you say the only needs to fix one's will resolutely on some objective to achieve it. It doesn't make sense. If I am not master of my own will, then I am not in a position to direct or it here or there as I wish. He slapped me on the back as he always did when he was pleased with me. Good for you, I'm glad you asked, he said, laughing. You must always ask, you must always doubt. But it is a very simple matter. If, for example, a night moth wanted to direct his will on a star or some equally remote object, he would fail. He doesn't even make the attempt. He confines his search to what makes sense for him, that is, what he needs, what is indispensable to him. And he achieves the miraculous. He develops a magic sixth sense which no other creature possesses but him. There is more scope and interest in the case of human beings than of animals, but even we're bounded within a pretty narrow circle beyond which we may not stray. It is all very well for me to imagine this or that. Imagine I will get to the North Pole or some such idea, but I can focus my will strongly enough on it only if the wish is really so deeply rooted within me that it permeates my whole being. Once that is the case, once you feel what is required of you from within, all is well and you can harness your will like an obedient horse. It is no use, for example, my undertaking to will that our pastor shall take to wearing spectacles. It would be reducing the thing to a game. But when that time in autumn I made the firm resolution to be shifted from my desk in the front of the class, it was effective. A boy suddenly turned up whose name preceded mine in the alphabet and who had been away ill before, and as someone had to take his place, I was given it because my will was ready to seize the opportunity. Yes, I said, I remember having a special feeling at the time from the moment when we took an interest in each other. You began to get closer to me literally. But how did it come about? You did not come and sit by me straight away. You were content to sit on the bench in front of me occasionally, weren't you? Why was that? Yes, that is so. I did not know myself where I wanted to be when I wanted to shift from my original place. I merely knew that I wanted to sit further back. It was my wish to get closer to you, and that, to begin with, was quite unconscious. At the same time, your will accorded with mine and helped me. Only when I found myself sitting in front of you did I realize that my wish was only half fulfilled and that my sole wish had been to sit next to you. But there wasn't a new boy joining the class just then. No, but I was merely doing what I wanted at that time and sat down next to you without further thought. The boy with whom I changed places was too taken aback to object, and the pastor too noticed on one occasion that there had been a swap round, but every time he had to do with me something appeared to disturb him. He knew my name was Demian and that something was wrong, that since my name began with a D, I ought not to be sitting directly behind an S. But the thought did not penetrate his consciousness because my will opposed it, because I continued to thwart him. Thwart? He kept noticing that something was odd, and the good man looked at me and tried to puzzle it out. But I had a simple expedient. I stared him out of each occasion. It was a treatment very few people can stand. They all become uncomfortable. If you want to get something out of someone and you look him in the eye unexpectedly and resolutely, and he doesn't become ill at ease, give it up. You'll never get anywhere with him. Never. But that is a rare occurrence. In actual fact, I know only one person with whom it is ineffective. And who is that? I asked him quickly. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing as they did when he became thoughtful. Then he turned away and gave no reply, and though I was profoundly curious, I could not repeat the question. I believe, however, that he had his mother in mind. He seemed very closely bound up with her. Yet he never as much as mentioned her name and never took me along to their house. I hardly knew what his mother looked like. Many a time I attempted to imitate him and fix my will on something with such concentration that I was certain to achieve it. They were wishes which seemed urgent enough to me, but nothing happened. It didn't work. I could not bring myself to mention the matter to Demian. I should have found it impossible to confess my wishes to him, nor did he ask me. Meantime, cracks had begun to appear in my religious faith, and yet my way of thought, which was very much dominated by Damian's influence, was very different from that of my fellow pupils who boasted a complete unbelief. For there were some such boys among us. They would say, for example, that it was ridiculous and unworthy of man to believe in a God, and that stories like that of the Trinity and the Virgin Birth were absurdities, and that it was a scandal that such stuff was being hawked round in our times. But I did not share these views. Even where my doubts lay, I knew enough from my childhood's experience about the reality of a pious life such as my parents led, and that it was neither unworthy or hypocritical. Furthermore, I felt then, as ever, the deepest awe before the truly religious. But Damian had accustomed me to considering and explaining the stories and articles of faith to myself in a less hidebound and more personal and imaginative way. At any rate, I gladly and willingly accepted the interpretations he urged on me. A good deal of it, such as the Cain episode, was indeed more than I could take, and on one occasion during the confirmation classes, he frightened me with an idea which was, if possible, even more startling. The teacher has been speaking of Golgotha. The Bible account of the passion and death of the Savior had made a deep impression on me from my earliest days. Very often, a small boy round about the time of Good Friday, after my father had read the story of Passion to us, deeply moved and caught up, I had myself inhabited this sorrowful yet beautiful, pale, ghostly, monstrously living world of Gethsemane and Mount Golgotha. And when I heard Matthew Passion, the mournful, glowing power of the suffering of that hidden word had sent mystic shudders through me. Even today, I find in this music and in the Actus Tragicus the epitome of all poetry and artistic expression. At the end of the lesson in question, Demian said to me thoughtfully, "This story has something about it that I don't like, Sinclair. Read it through. Pass your tongue over it. There's an insipid element in it. It's this business of the two thieves. Wonderful how the three crosses stand next to each other on the mount. But then why this tract-like story about the honest thief? First he was a criminal and had committed evil deeds, God knows what, and now he melts and takes part in tearful scenes of sorrow and repentance. What sense is there, I ask you, in such repentance when he is only 2 steps away from the grave? It's nothing but one of your pious moral tales, sugary and unconvincing, helped down with the grease of sentimentality and an edifying background. If you had to choose one of the 2 thieves today for a friend, or consider which of the 2 you would prefer to trust, it certainly wouldn't be the sniveling convert. No, the other is the man and has real character. He despises a conversion which for a man in his position can only be pretty speech, and pursues his own way to the end. He does not forswear the devil who must have aided and abetted him at the 11th hour. He has character, and there are only too few people of character in the Bible. Perhaps he was a descendant of Cain's. Don't you agree? I was dumbfounded. I thought I was thoroughly familiar with the accepted story of the crucifixion, and I now saw for the first time how little personal imagination I had brought to my hearing and reading of it. Yet Damian's new conception of it had me for a fatal ring. It threatened to overthrow the solid beliefs in me to which I felt I must cling. No, one could not turn everything upside down in that way, least of all the Holy of Holies. As usual, Demian noticed my opposition at once, but before I could say anything, he interrupted in a resigned voice. I know it's the old story as long as you don't take the thing seriously, but there's something I would like to tell you. We were here dealing with one of the places where one is very conscious of the weakness of this religion. The point is that this God of both the Old and New Testament is a wonderful figure, but not what he purports to represent. He is all that is good, noble. He is the fatherly, the beautiful, the most high, the sentimental, all right. But the world consists also of other things which are merely ascribed to the devil. And that half section of the world is suppressed if it is never mentioned. It is the same as the way they celebrate God as the father of all life, but the whole of sex life, which is the basis of life itself, they are silent about, or indeed, whenever possible, describe it as sinful and the work of the devil. I have no objection to people honoring this God Jehovah, far from it, but I consider that we should sanctify and honor everything, the whole world, not merely this artificially separated official half. Therefore, alongside the divine service should be a devil's service that, in my view, would be right and proper. Otherwise, you must create a God for yourself who embraces the devil in himself, and before him you don't have to drop your eyes in shame when the most natural things in the world take place. Contrary to his normal way, he had become almost violent, but immediately afterwards he smiled again and did not worry me further. His words, however, went straight to my adolescent heart. What Demian had said about God and the devil, about the godly official and the suppressed devil's world, fitted in with my own ideas on the subject, my own myth, the conception I had of two worlds or two different halves of the world, the light and the dark, the realization that my problem was a problem of all humanity, a problem of all life and philosophy suddenly swept over me like a holy shadow, and I was overcome with fear and awe when I saw how deeply my own personal life was caught up in an eternal stream of great ideas. This realization was not a joyful one, although to some extent gratifying and corroborative. I found it hard and unpalatable because it contained a note of responsibility, of self-reliance, something beyond childish ideas. It implied standing alone. For the first time in my life, this deep secret was revealed to me, and I told my friend about my idea of two different worlds, which I had held since childhood. He saw immediately that it was entirely in sympathy with him and believed him to be right. But it was not his way to exploit his knowledge. He listened to me more attentively than he had ever done before and looked into my eyes until I had to avert mine. For in his gaze I saw once again the strange look, the animal-like timeliness that had no age. "We'll talk about it another time," he said forbearingly. "I see that you have thoughts you're unable to express. If that is so, you must know that you too have not lived so far according to your own conception of life, and that is not a good thing. Only the ideas that we really leave have any value. You have known that your permitted world was only half of the world, and you have tried to subjugate the second half after the manner of the priests and teachers. It will not be to your benefit. It benefits no one once he has begun to think. I was profoundly moved. But, I almost shouted, they're genuinely foul and forbidden things. You can't deny that. They're forbidden and we must renounce them. I know that there is murder and all manner of vice, but merely because it exists, am I to go and become a criminal? We won't continue this discussion today, said Demian, trying to appease. Thou shalt certainly not kill, nor rape and kill girls. But you haven't yet reached the stage where you can understand what permitted and forbidden really means. You have only tracked down part of the truth. The rest is still to come. You can be quite sure of that. You have now had an urge in you for about a year that is stronger than anything else and is considered forbidden. The Greeks and many other races, on the other hand, elevated this impulse into a godhead and honored it at their great religious festivals. What is forbidden is not permanently so, it can change. Even today, any man can sleep with a woman once he has been to the priest with her and got married. With other races, it is different, even nowadays. Therefore, each one of us must discover for himself what is permitted and what is forbidden as far as he himself is concerned. It is possible never to do a forbidden things and yet be a real villain. And conversely, fundamentally, it is merely a question of complacency. Whoever is too complacent to think for himself and be his own judge manages to accommodate himself to the shalt nots as they exist at the present time. It is easy for him, but there are others who are conscious of the commandments in themselves. Things are forbidden to them which every man does every day of his life, and other things are permitted to them which are otherwise prohibited. Every man must stand alone. Demian suddenly seemed to regret having said so much, and he felt silent. I could already grasp to some extent intuitively what his reactions were. Although he was in the habit of expressing his ideas in an agreeable and apparently perfunctory manner, he could not tolerate talking for the sake of talking. As he once told me, he was aware of my genuine interest, but he felt that I treated clever conversation too much as a kind of game, in short, without due seriousness. As I read the last word, seriousness, which I have just written another scene, the most striking I had ever experienced with Max Damian in those still half childish days, leaps back to my mind. The day of our confirmation approached, and the last lessons of the preparation by the pastor had to do with the Last Supper. It was a matter of great importance to the pastor, who went to considerable pains to explain it. Something of a sanctified mood certainly pervaded the atmosphere during those lessons. But it was precisely during those last periods of preparation that my thoughts were tied up elsewhere and, moreover, with the person of my friend. While I looked forward to the confirmation which was described to us, our solemn acceptance into the community of the church, the thought rose urgently within me that the value of the last 6 months of religious preparation did not rest in what we had learned, but in Demian's proximity and influence. It was not into the church that I was ready to be received, but into something of an entirely different nature, an order of thought and personality which I felt must exist somewhere on earth, and whose representative or apostle was Demian, my friend. I endeavored to suppress this thought. I was anxious to submit to the solemn ceremonial of the confirmation service with a certain dignity, whatever happened, and this did not seem to fit in at all with my new idea. Yet do what I would, the thought was present, and it gradually became linked in my mind with the approaching church ceremony. I was ready to comprehend it differently from the others. For me, it was to signify my acceptance into a world of thought as I had learned to experience it in Demian. It was in those days that I once more engaged in a vigorous argument with him. It was just before an instruction class. Demian was reserved by nature and found no pleasure in my talk, which must have been both pompous and precocious. "We talk too much," he said with unwonted seriousness. "Clever talk is of no value whatsoever. One merely gets further and further away from oneself, and that is a crime. One should be able to crawl right into oneself like a tortoise." Immediately afterwards we entered the schoolroom. The lesson begun. I was careful to attend, and Damian did not try to distract me. After a while I began to be conscious of an odd feeling from the side where he sat next to me, a chill or void, almost as if the place had somehow become unexpectedly empty. The feeling became oppressive, and I turned round. My friend sat there upright with his shoulders braced back as usual. But he looked different, and a kind of aura that was unfamiliar to me surrounded him. At first I thought his eyes were closed, but I saw that in fact they were open. But they were not focused on anything. It was an unseeing gaze, dead and turned inwards or staring into the far distance. There he sat completely motionless. He did not even seem to be breathing. His lips might have been carved out of wood or stone. His face was pale, uniformly pale like stone, and his brown hair was the most living thing about him. His hands lay on the desk in front of him, lifeless and still like objects, pieces of stone or fruit, pale and motionless yet not limp. They were like good, firm pods that had formed round a robust, hidden life. A shudder ran through me. He is dead, I thought. I almost said it aloud, but I knew that this was not so. My eyes were fixed on that pale stone mask, spellbound, and I felt that here was the real Demian. What he had been before when he had gone around and chatted with me was only half of him, a person who for a time was playing a part, adapting himself to it, joining in the game to oblige me. The real Demian, however, looked like this stone, age-old, animal-like, stone-like, handsome, cold, dead, and yet with an alarming secret life within. And round him hung his aura of quiet emptiness, this ether and celestial space, this lonely death. Now he has retreated completely within, I thought with a shudder. Never had I felt so lonely. I had no part in him. He was beyond my reach, farther away from me than if he had been on the remotest island in the world. I could hardly grasp the fact that I was the only one who noticed it. I felt that they must all be looking, all shuddering, but no one paid any attention to him. He sat there like a graven image, as stiff as an idol, and I cannot forget how when a fly alighted on his forehead and crawled over his nose and lips, not a muscle of his face twitched. Where had he withdrawn? What was he thinking? What was he feeling? Was he in heaven or in hell? It was an impossible question. When I saw him breathing and alive again at the end of the lesson, and his glance met mine, he looked no different from before. Where had he returned from? Where had he been? He appeared tired. The color had come back to his face. His hands moved again. His brown hair looked somehow dull and lifeless. The following days, I gave myself up to a new exercise in my bedroom. I sat rigid on a chair, stared into space, held myself completely motionless, and waited to see how long I could hold out and what I should experience. But I only succeeded in becoming tired. And my eyelids began to prick. Shortly afterwards came the confirmation service, of which I can recollect nothing of importance. Everything has transformed. My childhood tumbled about me in ruins. My parents regarded me with a certain embarrassment. My sisters had almost become strangers. A sense of disillusionment fatigated and blunted my normal feelings and pleasures. The garden had lost its fragrance, the forest its magic. The world stood round me like a clearance sale of old rubbish, insipid and which all its charm gone. Books were so much paper, music was a noise. That is the way the leaves fall round an autumn tree. It is unaware of it, rain runs down it, it is subjected to sun or frost, and life slowly retreats. It does not die, it waits. It had been decided that I should go to another school after the holidays and leave home for the first time. Sometimes my mother approached me with particular tenderness, taking leave of me as it were in advance, trying to inspire my heart with feeling of love and nostalgic memory. Demian had gone away. I was left alone.